My sister demanded my $50,000 inheritance to fix her mistake. So I let her destroy herself at our cousin's wedding. My life, for the longest time, has been a study in quiet discipline. I live in a small, one-bedroom apartment on the fourth floor of an older building, the kind with reliable plumbing and walls thick enough to mute the city's constant hum. My world is one of order. I wake up at 6 a.m., go for a run as the sun bleeds over the skyline, and by the time I sit down at my desk for my remote job as a software developer, I've already packed my lunch for the day. It's not a life of glamour, but it's mine. Every dollar saved, every small sacrifice, is tracked on a meticulous spreadsheet, a vibrant tapestry of color-coded cells that maps the slow, steady march toward my one, singular goal, a down payment on my own condo. This dream isn't about luxury or status. It's about sanctuary. It's about having a front door that no one can knock on with a new crisis, a space where the emotional weather is solely my own. For years, I've watched my older sister, Jenna, live a life that was the complete opposite of mine. Hers was a whirlwind of social events, European vacations documented in sun-drenched photos, and an endless parade of designer handbags, all funded by her husband, Derek. Derek is a genuinely good man, the kind whose kindness feels as steady and reliable as the sunrise. He adored Jenna, and my mother, in turn, adored Jenna's life. At family dinners, my mother would recount Jenna's latest trip or purchase with a pride that made it clear which daughter had won the unspoken contest of life. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who was always stable but never exciting. I was the backdrop against which Jenna's life sparkled. This dynamic was cemented a decade ago, when our grandfather passed away. I remember sitting in his old leather armchair, the scent of pipe tobacco and old books clinging to the air, as his lawyer explained the will. To Jenna, then 21 and in her prime of living for the moment, he left a brand-new, cherry-red convertible. I remember the sheer, unadulterated joy on her face as she clutched the keys. To me, he left $50,000, locked away in a trust that I couldn't touch until my 25th birthday. Tucked inside the legal documents was a handwritten note on his personal stationery. "For a stable future, my dear Clara," it read. "Build something that lasts." Jenna's convertible lasted less than 2 years before she wrapped it around an oak tree after a late-night party. The insurance payout funded a spontaneous, month-long trip to the Greek islands. My $50,000, however, became the cornerstone of my life's plan. It was the seed from which my dream of a home would grow. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I remember a time before the labels of the exciting one and the responsible one had hardened around us like plaster. I remember us as little girls, hiding in the dusty attic of our childhood home, whispering secrets under a single, bare light bulb. Her dreams were always grand. Castles, princes, a life of effortless beauty. My dreams were smaller, simpler. I just wanted a place that felt peaceful. I never imagined that her castle, one day, would demand the very bricks I was using to build my quiet house. The call that shattered her perfect world came on a Tuesday. It was my mother, her voice a thin, panicked wire over the phone. "It's over, Clara. It's all over." "What's over, Mom?" "Slow down. Derek," she sobbed. "He found out. He's leaving her." My stomach dropped. It turned out Jenna's affair wasn't a one-time mistake, but a prolonged relationship she'd been carrying on for nearly a year. Derek, a man whose entire being was built on loyalty and trust, was completely and utterly devastated. "He's throwing her out," my mother wailed, her grief quickly morphing into indignation. "He's kicking her out of her own home, after she gave him 5 years of her life. He's citing that horrible prenup his family forced on her." I remembered the prenup well. At the time, my mother had called it insulting, a sign that Derek's family didn't trust her precious daughter. It was an ironclad document, standard for a family with their kind of wealth, and it contained a crystal-clear infidelity clause. In the event of cheating, the unfaithful party would leave the marriage with only what they had brought into it. Jenna had brought nothing but a collection of expensive shoes and a taste for the finer things in life. That night, as I tried to work, my mind kept drifting. I thought of Jenna, of her beautiful, sun-drenched life now collapsing into dust. And a small, guilty part of me thought of my spreadsheet of the $50,000 from my grandfather sitting safe and sound, growing quietly in an investment account. It felt like a shield. I just didn't realize that soon they would see it as a sore to be claimed. Jenna moved into our mother's small, two-bedroom house, and the space immediately seemed to shrink, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of her drama. My visits, once a quiet weekly routine, became tense, draining affairs. Jenna would be on the couch, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, weeping theatrically about how her life was over. My mother would flutter around her, bringing her tea and stroking her hair, her voice laced with a venom reserved entirely for Derek. "How can a man be so cruel?" she'd say for the 10th time. "To just throw her out with nothing. It's monstrous." They never spoke of the affair. In their revised history, Derek was the villain, and Jenna was the innocent victim of his heartless legal maneuvering. During one of these visits, I watched Jenna as my mother was in the kitchen. The tears had stopped. She was scrolling frantically through her phone, her thumb swiping past photos of her old life, a ski trip to Aspen, a gala in New York, her and Derek smiling on a yacht. Her face wasn't sad, it was terrified. It was the raw panic of a person whose entire identity had just been deleted, and she was desperately searching for a way to restore from a backup that didn't exist. She wasn't mourning the loss of her husband. She was mourning the loss of her status, her audience, her reflection. A week later, I was summoned for a serious family talk. The air in my mother's living room was thick and heavy, like a storm was about to break. Jenna sat on one side of the couch, my mother on the other. They looked like a queen and her handmaiden, preparing to pass judgment. Jenna began, her voice practiced and sorrowful. She explained that she had spoken to lawyers. They all said the prenup was unbreakable. But, she said, her eyes lighting up with a flicker of hope, she'd found one. A real shark, an aggressive attorney who believed there was a slim, tiny chance to argue for some kind of settlement. A chance to walk away with something. "But he's expensive, Clara," she said, her voice dropping. "Very expensive. He needs a $50,000 retainer to even start." And then, her eyes, an exact replica of my mother's, locked onto mine. The room went silent. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "I need you to give me the money, Clara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The money Grandpa left. Before I could even process the audacity, my mother leaned forward, her face a mask of earnest sincerity. "It's family money, honey. You've just been holding on to it. Now is the time the family needs it. It's for your sister." A chilling clarity washed over me. In my mother's eyes, I didn't exist as an individual with my own dreams and future. I was a resource. I was the family's emergency fund, and Jenna was the emergency. The careful lines on my spreadsheet, the years of discipline, they meant nothing. I took a breath. "No," I said. My voice was quieter than I expected, but it was firm. "I'm not going to do that." I explained, calmly, that Grandpa had made his intentions clear. He gave her a car for her present. He gave me a trust for my future. I told them that her situation, as painful as it was the direct result of her own choices, and I would not be paying for her consequences. The change was instantaneous. Jenna's mask of victimhood shattered, replaced by a contorted face of pure rage. "Selfish," she screamed, lunging to her feet. "You are a selfish, jealous bitch. You've always been jealous of me and my life, and now you're happy to see me suffer." My mother jumped in, her voice shaking with manufactured righteousness. "Your father would be so ashamed of you. Family is supposed to help each other, no matter what. She's your sister." I didn't argue. I simply stood up and said, "My answer is no." Then I walked out the door. The backlash was immediate and relentless. First came the social media campaign. Jenna posted long, rambling statuses about being abandoned by those you thought you could count on, and how some people would rather hoard their money than watch their own blood drown. Mutual friends started giving me strange, pitying looks. Then they escalated. One afternoon, my mother showed up in my office building unannounced. She caused a loud, tearful scene in the lobby, telling the receptionist that her daughter was on the verge of homelessness while I, her other daughter, sat in my fancy office and refused to help. I had to physically guide her out of the building, my face burning with a humiliation so profound it felt like a fever. But the final straw, the one that broke something inside me for good, came 2 days later. I was called into a meeting with my boss and a representative from HR. They had a printed email on the table. It was from Jenna. She had found my boss's email address on the company website and had sent a message not only to him, but to the general HR inbox. In it, she brazenly lied, claiming that I was illegally withholding shared family inheritance funds and was committing financial abuse against my destitute sister. As I sat there in that sterile, air-conditioned office, forced to explain the most painful, private details of my family's dysfunction to my superiors, something inside me hardened. The shame and humiliation curdled into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They hadn't just crossed the line, they had burned the whole map. There was no going back. That night, my hands shaking, but my voice steady, I called a lawyer my friend had recommended. His name was Mr. Davies. After I laid out the whole story, from the inheritance to the email to my boss, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice calm and validating. "What you're describing is a textbook campaign of emotional and financial harassment. Your feelings are not an overreaction. They are entirely justified." For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. He drafted a formal cease and desist letter, and we sent it to both my mother and my sister the next day. I knew it wouldn't be the end, but it was the beginning of me fighting back. For about a month, the cease and desist letter seemed to work. The calls and texts stopped. The social media posts ceased. A fragile peace settled over my life, and I used it to push forward. I found a condo, a small but bright unit with a balcony overlooking a park. My offer was accepted. For the first time, my sanctuary felt real, tangible. And then came the wedding invitation. Our cousin, Maria, was getting married. I'd always been close to Maria, and I knew both Jenna and my mother would be there. A part of me wanted to decline, to stay in my safe, quiet bubble. But another, stronger part of me refused to be driven into hiding. I had done nothing wrong. I would not allow them to make me a pariah in my own family. I called Maria. "I know things are complicated," she said, her voice laced with stress. "Please, Clara, can you just be civil? For my sake? Don't let anything happen. I won't start anything, Maria. I promise." I told her, and I meant it. On the day of the wedding, I chose my dress with care. It was a simple, elegant sheath dress in a pale blush color. It felt calm and understated. Armed with my lawyer's advice, do not engage, but if they escalate, document everything, I walked into the reception hall. I saw them immediately across the room. My mother was in a loud, floral dress, and Jenna was beside her. Even from a distance, I could see the hard set of her jaw. She was wearing a dress that was a little too tight, a little too flashy, her makeup applied with a heavy hand. She looked like a woman desperately trying to perform a version of herself that no longer existed. She was holding a glass of red wine, like it was a weapon. I found a table with some old college friends and tried to blend in, to make myself small. For about an hour, it worked. The band played, people danced, and a fragile truce seemed to hold. I allowed myself to relax, just a little. And then, during a quiet moment when the band took a break, I saw her coming. Jenna was walking deliberately toward my table, weaving through the guests with an unnerving focus. My friends at the table tensed, aware of the simmering conflict. She stopped right in front of me, the scent of her sharp perfume and something sour, like desperation, preceding her. "I heard you're buying a condo," she sneered, her voice just loud enough for our table to hear. "It must be nice. Buying a home while I'm about to be homeless." My friends looked at me, their eyes wide. I took a slow breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I remember my lawyer's words. I discreetly reached into my clutch and, under the cover of the table, turned on my phone's audio recorder. "This isn't the time or the place, Jenna," I said, my voice steady. Her eyes narrowed. "It's easy for you to say that, sitting there with my money in your bank account." That was it. The public lie. The performance. And in that moment, I knew I was done being quiet. I stood up slowly, so we were face to face. "It's not your money, Jenna," I said, my voice chillingly calm and clear, cutting through the low murmur of the reception. "It never was." I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. I pressed on. "Grandpa gave you a car, which you crashed. He gave me a future, which I built. You are not entitled to the consequences of my discipline any more than I am to the consequences of your infidelity." The public declaration of the truth, the word infidelity, hanging in the air, was too much for her. Her face, already a mask of anger, twisted into something truly ugly. The carefully constructed narrative of her victimhood had been shattered in front of an audience, and she snapped. "You selfish bitch!" she shrieked, and with a flick of her wrist, she threw the entire contents of her glass at me. The dark red wine arced through the air, splashing across the front of my pale dress in a shocking, violent stain. The table gasped. Nearby conversation stopped, and before I could even react to the cold, sticky liquid soaking through the fabric, she lunged. Her nails, long and sharp, scratched at my face and arms as she tried to grab me, screaming about how I had ruined her life. It was a complete, shocking, public meltdown. Time seemed to slow down. My friends jumped up, trying to pull her off me. A couple of the groomsmen rushed over. And then my mother was there, but she wasn't coming to control her daughter. She was coming to defend her. "What did you say to her?" she screamed at me, trying to blame me for being physically assaulted. "What did you do to set her off?" But her voice was drowned out by another, more powerful one. "Get out." It was Maria, the bride. Her beautiful white dress was a stark contrast to the ugly chaos. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She wasn't looking at me. She was pointing a shaking finger directly at Jenna. "Get out of my wedding now," she yelled, her voice ringing through the suddenly silent hall. She spun around to her wedding photographer. "Did you get that? I hope to God you got all of that." Then she turned to the stunned guests, her voice trembling with rage, but clear as a bell. Everyone saw what she did. My cousin did nothing but sit there, and this monster attacked her. It was the ultimate validation, the final nail in their coffin. My mother stood frozen, her accusations dying on her lips as she realized the entire room had just witnessed the truth. The narrative she had so carefully spun was in tatters. Venue security arrived, escorting a still struggling, screaming Jenna and a white-faced, silent mother out of the reception. I was left standing there, covered in wine, shaking with adrenaline, but for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly vindicated. The rest of the wedding passed in a blur. Maria and her new husband were profusely apologetic, but I insisted it wasn't their fault. I left early, the sticky, sweet smell of red wine clinging to me like a grim trophy. The next morning, I woke up to angry red scratches on my arms and neck. Looking at them in the mirror, I didn't feel anger or sadness, just a quiet, grim necessity. I went to the police station. The building was sterile and impersonal, and the process was procedural and slow. I told the officer everything, my voice never wavering. I provided the audio recording from my phone, a list of a dozen witnesses from the wedding, and the contact information for the venue security team. I filed a formal report for assault. There was no triumph in it, just the feeling of taking a necessary, logical step like filing taxes or paying a bill. A few weeks later, my lawyer, Mr. Davies, called. "The restraining order has been granted, Clara," he said, "against both of them. They are legally required to stay away from you, your home, and your workplace." It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like a wall of solid steel. It was the physical manifestation of the boundary I had finally, painfully erected. The closing on my condo went through without a hitch. The first night, I slept on an air mattress on the floor of the empty living room. The silence was absolute. For the first few days, it felt less like peace and more like absence. The silence was the space where my mother's guilt-tripping phone calls and Jenna's dramatic texts used to be. It was the sound of amputation. I had to mourn the family I wished I had, the mother and sister they could have been, before I could start to appreciate the peace they left behind when they were gone. News of the wedding incident had spread through our extended family like wildfire. Maria, it turned out, was a formidable ally. She had made sure everyone knew the unvarnished truth of what had happened. The aunts who had once sent me sanctimonious texts about family loyalty were now silent. I heard through Maria that my mother had been calling them, trying to spin her story, but no one was buying it anymore. Her credibility, along with Jenna's, had been incinerated in that public display of rage. Jenna's divorce was finalized. As expected, the prenup was enforced to the letter. She received nothing. She had to sell the luxury car Derek had once bought her just to cover her living expenses. She and my mother were now living together permanently in that small house. Their dynamic, once built on my mother's adoration and Jenna's entitlement, reportedly curdling into a toxic stew of mutual resentment and blame. They were trapped in a prison of their own, making a life sentence of consequences. Slowly, my empty condo began to feel like a home. I painted the walls a soft, calming shade of green. I bought a rail bed. I spent a Saturday assembling a bookshelf with my own two hands. One afternoon, while unpacking the last box of old keepsakes, I came across a small, framed photo of my grandfather and me, taken on my 10th birthday. He had his arm around me, and we were both smiling. I looked at his kind eyes and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to mine. He hadn't just left me money. He had seen me, truly seen me, and he had given me the tools to save myself. I placed the photo on my new bookshelf, the first thing to adorn its shelves. That evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker on, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Maria. "Hey, you've been on my mind. I'm so sorry for everything that happened. Coffee this week? Just us." A genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I'd love that." I typed back. I looked out at the vast, sprawling city, at the millions of lights representing millions of other lives. My world had become smaller in some ways. The part of my life that had been occupied by my mother and sister was now a quiet, empty space. But my world had also become infinitely larger. It was filled with possibility, with peace, with the freedom to build a life on my own terms. I had learned that true family isn't about obligation or blood. It's about respect, safety, and the people who choose to show up for you, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. It's about the people who help you defend your peace, not the ones who constantly try to invade it. I had to burn the old definition of family to the ground to find out what the word truly meant. I had to learn that the most important boundary you can ever set is the one that protects your own soul. Have you ever had to make a choice that felt like losing everything just to save yourself?